I choose to become a chef, not because I was enthusiastic at that time about it, because I had no choice. But I started to love being a chef. I became a very good chef ultimately, not because of me, but because I had a very, very tough teacher, old school, and he pushed me to become the number 3 in Switzerland at the final tests, which was because of him. So that's where I learned that actually sometimes a strict teacher who pushes you to the limit can really, really make a difference. So I got this award.
Hi, my name is Tracy May, and I'm here with Chat.Travel, your leading podcast for everything hospitality, F&B, everything in the business sector, based in Da Nang. I'm really excited to be here as a guest host, and more excited to be here with my friend Andre, the GM of the Furama, of the Ariyana, of the Furama Resort, and also the villas. And I'm so sorry, I don't want to murder your Swiss German last name. Could you please pronounce it for me?
Gentzsch.
Gentzsch.
Yes.
Andre Gentzsch. It's very nice to be here with you. The last time I saw you, I think you so kindly invited me to be a speaker at your convention.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to see you again,
Yes.
Tracy. You're looking energetic as usual, even though if I heard a rumor you slept very little last night.
I did. I had a very delayed flight, so on 3 hours. Apologize to everyone for that. If I lose my train of thought, but I'm going to do my best.
Right. No, yeah, we saw each other last time at the Horrorfex.
At the Horrorfex, yes.
Yes.
It was really, really interesting. That was the first time you produced that convention, correct?
Absolutely. The idea was basically, I'm now 7 years in Vietnam, and you have all these big events in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh about tourism and hospitality. But as you know, Da Nang is a tourism hub. It's not only the third largest city in Vietnam, but when it comes to tourism, we have actually a 20% share of all the tourists coming to Vietnam. So we just got this idea about 2-3 years ago where we said, first of all, we should do something in Da Nang. Second, we noticed most of the conventions and conferences in hospitality and tourism in Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi focus actually on expatriates. You know, we're
Really?
not talking about the exhibitions, but we're talking about the conventions and conferences where people actually talk and there are in panel. There is a lot. There are a lot of Vietnamese too, but there is not a 50% amount of Vietnamese audience, I feel often, and there is definitely not what you would say gender equality, for example. It's most of the time men, except for the spa. So we said like, okay, what we're gonna do is now we're gonna make a conference, we're gonna make it from Vietnamese for Vietnamese, we're gonna make it specifically also for 3 and the lower class 4-star hotels, and not only the international chains and the 5-star hotels, and we're gonna make sure we're gonna have 50% speakers being women. Right, and that's how I found you. No, you're obviously a brand on your own.
Well, I was really honored to speak on it, and it was an incredible panel that I participated in. I booked dinner at Sea Dining with Alessio. He does his restaurant, and we met, obviously, he was on the panel as well. So,
Yes.
yeah, so I want to sort of get back to the basics. We're people of age. You've been in this business for decades, right? 30 years?
We are good wine.
Good wine. We're vintage.
We are no more grape juice, we are wine.
Please tell me, you are born and raised in Switzerland. You have worked in the hospitality sector in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, all over the place. Can you tell me without giving your bio, give me a little bit of your background into the space and how you ended up in Da Nang?
Yeah, okay, to keep that very short, I'm coming from a hotelier's family. My father has been a general manager from the early 70s, and he actually belongs to the pioneer generation, to the first people who came to Southeast Asia to open international hotels. So he, for example, he went with my mom in 1970 to Pattaya for the opening of the Nipah Lodge Hotel. At that time, Pattaya, believe it, was a fishing village of 2,000 people.
Sure.
So this was that generation, but then things didn't go so well between my parents, so my mom went to back to Europe, went to Germany, went to Switzerland with me, and my father did his career in Southeast Asia. And he actually became a very, very famous hotelier in Malaysia, where he even got merits from the government. And even nowadays, when I go to events, everybody keeps on talking about my father. There was just this funny one. I was last year at a conference in Bangkok, and there was actually the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sarawak. That's one state in Malaysia. And when I told him I'm Peter Müller's son, that's my father, he wanted to have a picture with me, with Peter Müller's son. Which in that
That's
way,
so cool.
yeah, it's amazing. He really, really put his mark. So in a way, it's actually good I'm in Vietnam because I want to be my own brand.
Of course.
But having said so, I grew up in Switzerland. Well, my brother and my sister grew up with my father. I grew up in Switzerland, and I grew up actually up country under very simple circumstances, petrol station, hundreds of cows around the house, and so on and so forth. I always wanted to study history or astronomy. I went to the so-called pre-university in Switzerland. I studied because of this mathematics, something which my financial directors hate until today, because I'm probably the first GM who is really, really deep into mathematics. You don't fool me with figures. In fact, I very often correct my accounting wherever I am, you know. But over time...
So you're doing P&L?
Oh,
personally?
I mean, I analyze it, but the thing with me is I'm lucky in that I can see very fast if something is wrong. I learned that, you know, like look at the glance and possible, not possible, possible, that can't be. Let's double check, you know. But then when I became 15, 16, 17, my personality changed, you know. You know me, I'm a lively person. I like mingling, I like culture and all that. So studying history and probably going and digging out something with a toothpick or sitting in a laboratory calculating the stars wasn't my thing anymore. So I started to look for new things, and I decided to go into hospitality. And I wanted to go to the hotel management school. And then I went to my parents and said, could you pay me the hotel management school? And my parents said, no. And I was like, what? And then my father said, look, I'm going to pay you 50% of the hotel management school. The other 50% you earn yourself, because I want you to learn about life. And the second thing, you must make an apprenticeship in hospitality. Because if you want to become a general manager and you want to be good, you need to know the business from the bottom. You need to know how the workers think, how it goes there, how they function. So I was roaming a little bit around, and I chose to become a chef, not because I was enthusiastic at that time about it, because I had no choice. But I started to love being a chef. I became a very good chef ultimately, not because of me, but because I had a very, very tough teacher, old school. And he pushed me to become the number 3 in Switzerland at the final tests, which was because of him. So that's where I learned that actually sometimes a strict teacher who pushes you to the limit can really, really make a difference. So I got this award as the 3rd best chef at that time in Switzerland. And then I moved on, earned some money. When I had enough money, I went back to the parents. Then I went with half my money and their money, of course, to the hotel management school. And after the hotel management school, I started my career right away as an assistant food and beverage manager with Hilton. And lucky again there. The reason why I got immediately such a good job was because I was obviously a bit older than all the others from the hotel management school. And I was already experienced. So all this work as a chef and making an apprenticeship and the studying before, that all paid out. Because all my colleagues, they all had to start from the bottom again. And I got immediately a chance at Hilton. I was chosen among 150 candidates by Hilton. And from there on, I went on traveling with Hilton to Morocco, traveling with Hilton to Egypt. I took a break. I left the hospitality then and started in airline industry, in airline catering.
Interesting.
Yes, for 2 years. I started.
Which airline?
At that time, that was Crossair.
Okay.
Crossair Swiss. You know, they actually, at that time, you had Swissair, and they had a subsidiary called Crossair. Okay. And once the Swissair airline failed, they actually used the Crossair to create the new airline Swiss. So Swiss is kind of a baby out of Crossair and Swissair. And they subscribed me for an international general manager program. They brought me to Atlanta, to Bangkok for training. But after 2 years, that was in 2001, that was then when the Swiss Air airline got grounded. That was a big, big disaster for this group. And that was at the time where I actually realized airline catering is a dead end. Because the world market at that time was controlled by 2 companies only. That was Gate Gourmet under Swiss Air, and that was LG, I think was the name, from Lufthansa. And together they did 70% of the catering. But many people...
For just Switzerland or Europe?
No, see, that's what many people don't know. These companies, they're everywhere. They are in New York, they are in Atlanta,
right.
They're everywhere. So actually, the food is produced, for example, by Gate Gourmet for Air France, for Lufthansa, for anyone who goes there and pays for it. You know, and the quality of the food depends on what you pay. So if Lufthansa has better food than Air France, the better salmon is probably because Lufthansa is willing to pay for a better quality.
Interesting.
But the airlines don't run their own catering.
It's one monopoly.
At
one
that time,
group.
it was not a monopoly, but 2 LSG Sky Chefs, that was the name for Lufthansa,
Okay.
and Gate Gourmet for Swiss Air were controlling 70% of the world market.
Interesting.
And that's when I
no
realized, you know what, if I work with Gate Gourmet and something goes wrong with Gate Gourmet, and that's very specialized, that field, then I only can go to LSG. I'm like in handcuffs, you know, so I said to myself, no, I don't want to do that. That's too little of a market, controlled by 2 major players. And then I went back to the hospitality industry, but I decided not to work for international companies anymore, which we might come back later to the reasons why. And I worked in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, and went on with my career until I got a telephone call when I was in Malaysia in 2015 by Wing Group to come to Vietnam. And here I am.
And here you are. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So, you know, obviously, and I've lived in Vietnam for 5 years now, and I've seen such rapid growth and expansion, especially in these sectors, despite the pandemic. And it's my understanding that, you know, due to COVID, I think the hospitality sector was down 97% than previous years. I mean, we have faced unbelievable challenges. And, you know, part of it was obviously a global pandemic. I think a lot of it has to do with climate change. I mean, I don't know if you've been reading the news, but my city of Los Angeles is burning to the ground right now. Really, really scary times. How do you adapt? And how do you remain sustainable in a world where you're constantly having to battle the elements, constantly having to battle ongoing trends, not only in, for example, sustainability, but also for your customer expectations when, you know, Vietnam had to, you know, learn about Western hospitality and adopt that. And you're a mentor in that space. So I'm really curious as to, for the last 5 years, where you've seen it, how you have adapted your residencies to be able to forecast, God forbid, another crisis, and how you are maintaining your level of excellence in a world that is so, you never know what's going to happen.
Well,
That's a deep question, sorry.
let me quickly go back to COVID, actually. You see, what I have to say, Vietnam was probably the first country, definitely one of the first countries to react when the pandemic started in China. That is probably has to do with history. Vietnam is used to observe what's going on. There was the bird flu before and all this. So I do remember Vietnam closed down already in January, the borders. That was at the time where everybody in Europe was laughing about it. And I was at that time in Phu Quoc, and we had the flight.
It was March because I got stranded here. It was March.
No, but they started with the quarantine already in January in February in Vietnam, because I was running a hotel and the flight was coming from Italy. In March, the disaster started in Italy.
Right.
But I was there. There were people flying from Italy, and we got the order from the government quarantine. So that was in January already. Anyone who flies is on the way to Vietnam has to go into quarantine. And that was a huge problem.
I thought you were talking about the border closures.
And that was a huge problem with Alpitour and with TUI at that time, you know. So then Vietnam closed down the border, But what Vietnam did very well, I mean, within the country, actually life goes on at that time.
I remember.
And there was a massive amount of domestic tourism. So tourism went down 97% from an international point of view. But actually, we had a massive amount of domestic tourism at that time in Phu Quoc, of course, with dropping prices.
Right.
So everybody adjusted that. So that helped over the first year, not over the second year, but that helped over the first year. So in that way, Vietnam did very, very good with the tourism. What Vietnam did not good, Vietnam missed the chance of COVID of having an amazing start as a tourism country in the future again. What do I mean? You see, I don't know if you're familiar with Formula One. Formula One race, right? They have the red flag.
My friend is Petra Eccleston, actually, whose dad started it.
Absolutely fantastic. So, you know, in the Formula One, you have the red flag. So if there is a bad accident, there is actually the red flag, which means everybody has to go back to the start, right? So if you are, for example, number one, and the number two is 20 seconds behind, what they do is everybody has to go back in line. The number one is still the number one, but the number two is right after the number one, and they do a restart. So COVID, as a matter of fact, was a restart. Everybody had to go back to zero, basically. It doesn't matter if it was Thailand, the market leader, or Vietnam. And this would have been the chance of Vietnam to start an amazing marketing campaign during COVID for after COVID, and they didn't do this.
Could not agree more.
Kept on saying that this is your opportunity. Everybody goes back to zero. Start the campaign now, and we didn't. And what happened when after COVID? Thailand went off like a rocket. Vietnam, are we doing fine? Yes. Do we have tremendous growth? Yes. I give kudos to Vietnam tourism that we are having a very, very good growth now. But fact is, 23 was a slow start, a slower start than many other countries have, and that was unnecessary. Now, coming back to the other question, how do you cope with this as a hotelier? Yeah, look, I'm now 30 years in the hospitality. I was in Morocco when the king died. That was a crisis. I was already in the hospitality during the Tiger crisis, 95, 96. I was in Dubai when the financial crisis broke out. Then there was the crisis with Greece and the euro. Now we had the COVID. Frankly speaking, it's just a question of time until the next crisis comes again. You know, as a private person, save some money.
Right.
You never know what's going to happen next, you know. And we know there are already some crises looming, especially in Southeast Asia. Is it politically? Is it naturally, environmentally? The next things are coming up, and we can see it. We just don't know when exactly.
Oh, I just got over dengue fever. Trust me. I'm from New York City. I don't know from dengue fever. Got bitten by the wrong mosquito. Like, you don't know. And you need to be prepared.
Yeah, yeah. So, first of all, as a hotelier, diversify.
Right.
You know, it sounds so simple, but for example, here in Da Nang, we're very much depending on the Korean market, and things happen so fast, like now the airplane in Jeju, and some hotels are already suffering. I worked in Malaysia when they shot down the airplane over the Ukraine, and when the other airplane on the way from Malaysia to China disappeared. And Malaysia was depending, not as a country, but in Kuala Lumpur, many hotels on Chinese tourism. And from one day to the other, the Chinese tourism broke down. It was a huge disaster. We are running the same risk. So as a hotelier or as a destination, you really must diversify. Have your 15% Indians, have your 20% Koreans, have your 15% Japanese, have your 10% Americans. Easy said, not so easy to be done. So
But it's all about marketing, right? Because I mean, you keep talking Korean, and obviously that's the largest sector of your business right now because it's very, very close. But are you not targeting to Europe? Are you not targeting to the US? Or
we do, but some don't, you know. I mean, obviously right now it's the easiest to say, okay, there are the Koreans know Da Nang, let's go for the Korean market, you're saving marketing money, right? But by saving this marketing money, you are actually exposed to exactly what you said if something happens in Korea, you know. And do not forget the domestic market. So that was the big lesson of COVID. There were some international hotels, some resorts, they were so much targeting on foreigners that when COVID came and the Vietnamese government tried to promote domestic tourism, the Vietnamese were actually traveling for these lower prices, but they did not travel to certain hotels and certain brands because they never took care of the Vietnamese market. So where I'm working right now, for example, we are really taking care that we have a fair share of Vietnamese customers, even though at times that means we need to adapt to their segment, we need to adjust the pricing a little bit. We want to be a Vietnamese hotel and we want to take care of the Vietnamese customers.
So, okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. So you're saying it's all about adjusting pricing. Do you find it different? Like if me being American and coming to the Furama, right? And is the approach of how you show me hospitality different than it is a Vietnamese who's traveling here from, Hai Phong or Hanoi?
Look, I would say, of course, hospitality is hospitality. Guest service is guest service, friendliness is friendliness.
Right.
You're not going to change your standards, but the needs are, for example, slightly different. If I have American guests versus Korean guests, for example, the American guests will stay in the resort day and night. The Korean guests will go out. So the more American guests I have in the resort, the more revenue I actually make with my food and beverage. The Koreans will come, they will stay in the hotel, but they will go all outside for the spa. They will all go outside for shopping. Okay, shopping is not so important for us. And they will all go outside to eat and drink. Americans tend to spend time, like in the good old days. They go to the bar, they listen to the pianist, they have 2 drinks before they go dining, then they go dining, and after dining they go back to the bar when the band is playing. Koreans don't do that. And you have these differences, these small differences between all the nationalities. So for example, for me, I have a monthly statistic per nationality, not only occupancy, but also the room rates they pay, and, very important, how much they spend in the hotel. So let me say, for example, this. If I do a promotion in Vietnam during the school holidays, where I know the Americans don't come anyway, I might lower my prices for $20, right? Now, the average Vietnamese, I'm just saying a figure now, I'm not going to reveal my figures, but the average Vietnamese spends maybe $10 a day in the hotel. I have to take that into consideration because the average American maybe spends $50 a day in the hotel.
At least.
Yes, and that over 5, 6, 7 days over a whole year makes a massive difference. So the approach is different in that sense. When I have American guests, my F&B manager knows he needs to have more people working inside the bar. So give the day off when the Vietnamese are there. Let them all work in double shifts if needed, as long as it's within the law, of course, when the Americans are there. So that's the different approach.
What do you wish your legacy to be? You are the GM of this wonderful resort. And it's one of the legacy resorts, and it's been around for 20 years, right?
25 years.
25 years. So one of the first 5-star resorts in this region.
Yes.
So it already has a brilliant legacy.
Yes.
And history in Vietnam as being the pioneer in the space.
Yeah.
What do you want your legacy to be, your contribution to this legacy?
I think my contribution is in 2 ways. Number one, I really want, when I leave Furama one day, that people say he did something for Vietnam. I don't consider myself one of those, like they call them in Malaysia, T&G, touch and go GMs. I come and I go and I leave everything behind me and I talk about what I did, but actually I didn't do much in 2 years. If I leave Vietnam, if I leave Furama, I would like, similar like in Winpearl before, that people actually say, I groomed Vietnamese people, I shared knowledge, I elevated the service level and the quality of the hotel, and I also took care of the environment, the society at that place. That's number one. Number two, purely from a business point of view, Furama is a well-established place, as you said, the resort and the villas. But yes, Ariana needed a push. We gave it a very strong push, the convention center. And that's the second one, purely from a business point of view, that Andre really made a difference for Ariana, which I think we are on the way. But it's not Andre, it's Andre and the team. Or let's say the team and Andre.
Right. Well, there's no I in team, my friend,
Right.
ever. So let's talk about Ariana. I mean, that's obviously where we met. You were kind enough to fly me out, and I was a guest speaker at your convention and sat on a panel with some of the biggest leaders in F&B in the country. I was very, very honored. Thank you. It is an extraordinary venue, and one that, you know, I kind of feel like I've got my ear on the ground, and one that I had not heard of until you so kindly invited me here. And I see incredible potential for it, international as well as domestic. And earlier off camera, we were talking about the idea of starting Danang Fashion Week and all of these different, in my opinion, starting a music festival, a real music festival with that place as the center is a no-brainer. Like, people fly from all over the world to come with major, major bands and international acts and DJs for a weekend beach/resort experience. To me, if I were you, that's the direction I would go. But what is the direction you want to go with it?
Okay, first of all, I'm glad to say we're going this direction already. We had next to
High five, yeah.
we had next to Ariana, we had this huge, huge grass lawn with palm trees between the convention center and actually the sea. And we flattened this and we turned this now into a 20,000 square meter large events lawn.
Amazing.
Right? And we had the first event in July with Mi Tam, the famous Vietnamese singer. And there was a stadium built for 6,000 people. And it was sold out, I heard, within 1 hour or something like that. And boom, there we go. You know, in the meantime, we had an ABBA cover band, we had a rock festival there already. And yes, we're actually, I can say that much, we're actually working with some names to bring bigger names to Danang. But having said so, very often we're not doing it ourselves. We're actually willing for anyone to rent it out. So if somebody brings a big name to Hanoi, why don't you fly them to Hanoi and afterwards you bring them to Da Nang? Because Da Nang has obviously all these international flight connections. Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, Manila, Hong Kong, you name it, direct flights every day. So I'm fully with you. We're working on it and it's going to go on the right way. But coming back, you see, Ariana is actually in a way synonymous to Vietnam when it comes to MICE business, conferences and conventions. Vietnam is sleeping on that side. It's slowly waking up. I see one or the other initiative. But let's go back to the history of Ariana. Ariana was built in 2015, 2016 for APEC 2017, for this international conference. And at that time, it was built and there was no real marketing strategy for what happens afterwards. It reminds a little bit of the Olympic Games. You build that stadium, but there is no strategy what to do afterwards.
Right, of course.
So in the years 2018, 2019, Ariana had a couple of conventions, but it was mainly doing just a bit of small domestic business. Then there came COVID, of course, and then after COVID, we started to have a look at it. I joined in 2022, and we actually realized that Ariana has to go international. And so we took big efforts, particularly end of 23 and in 24, to bring Ariana, to put Ariana on the international map. And you're absolutely right. There is a tremendous potential. Now, the same story which goes for Ariana should go to Vietnam. I had a telephone call about 6 months ago from the World Organization of Convention Centers. They're called ICA, because I know them. And they say, Andre, we have a big events organizer. He wants to make a big convention in Vietnam, but there's nobody we can talk to. Can you help us? And I'm like, wait. You are the World Congress, and you don't know to whom to talk? Yes, Andre. And that's the problem of Vietnam. In this World Congress, in this world organization, they have one member from Vietnam. Guess who? Ariana. Singapore alone has 11 members.
Right.
China has 80 members.
Tokyo,
Malaysia has 20
Bangkok.
members. And. So
Right.
everybody goes into this massive cake, but Vietnam doesn't. We don't have a national MICE bureau which is actively promoting Vietnam. And yes, like with tourism, Vietnam should be the next big thing. You see, how many Vietnam tourism offices are in the world? If I remember correctly, 3 or 4. One is in London, one is in Seoul, one is in Tokyo, the other one I forgot. 4 in the world. How many tourism offices do you think on average has South Korea, Singapore, Thailand and Malaysia in the world?
Right.
Each one of them 30 to 40. Can you imagine? Vietnam has 3 or 4 offices for selling Vietnam. Each of these countries I just mentioned has between 30 and 40 offices in the world. And then when you speak, they say that's the job of the ambassador. No, the ambassador has so many things to do, and he has to look also after the industry, after technology, diplomatic relations, and. The ambassador is not going to focusing on tourism. So, for me, visa would help, but get the marketing right.
Right.
How do you want to compete with other countries with 30 to 40 offices?
And you know what's so, like, to get deeper into this, what's so amazing about it is, as an American, Vietnam has a spotlight on it.
Yes.
My neighborhood where I live in Thao Dinh was rated by Time Out magazine of number 13 of 30 best neighborhoods in the world. Like, and, you know, between Anthony Bourdain and my former President Obama sitting on that plastic stool in Hanoi eating bun cha and drinking a Tiger beer, suddenly people are like, oh, Vietnam. You know, when I was first decided to move here, people were like, wait, I'm from New York City and LA. You're moving where? Where's Ho Chi Minh City? You know what I mean? But the potential of this place is so outstanding, and people from the outside world are looking in. It's got the cool factor here in manufacturing, in beauty, in history, in culture. How is it not being maximized? And what can we, I mean, I've got a voice, I'm an influencer, whatever that means, on social media, and I do a lot of TV. You're one of the most respected GMs in hospitality in Vietnam. What can we do? How do we partner? How do we get the word out?
I mean, I think first of all, I mean, in all fairness, they're trying hard. They're doing a good job. I mean, tourism is really, really growing. You know, I have to say, Da Nang particularly, they are very, very good. But yes, I mean, first of all, you really have to be ambitious. Look, we are all very, very proud that we surpassed the budget in 24 with the international travelers. But turning back the time 1 year, when they announced the budget, we all said the budget is by far too low. They hang the fruits very low. It was, you know, did we surpass? Yes, but the fruits, the budget were very low hanged. The people who made the budget for tourism in Vietnam were extremely careful for the year 24, and we all said as hoteliers, of course we're going to make the budget, because you're not pushing it, you're not pushing yourself to the limit.
Right.
You know, now, yes, I have to say the budget for next year is a considerable step upwards, so there is some improvement. What I think is, first of all, you see, you have Ho Chi Minh, you have Hanoi, you have all these different regions, but I don't see much of work together there. You know, Ho Chi Minh goes alone to Australia to chase for tourists. Hanoi goes alone to the United States to chase for tourists. Da Nang goes alone to Japan to chase for tourists. You know, so...
And Seoul, Korea.
Correct. So everybody does a little bit on his own, you know. Now you probably need to say, for a market which is new, you probably should work together. You know?
So is there a group? Is there a group in Vietnam of leaders in the travel and tourism and hospitality industry?
We have the VNTA, the Vietnam National Tourism Association.
Okay.
They're working together, but they're actually overlooking everything, and they're doing a lot of efforts to market Vietnam. But they don't have a direct say into the various regions. You know, and I mean, that is, for example, one of the problems. Vietnam doesn't really diversify much. I mean, look at Phu Quoc and Halong Bay.
Right.
Except for the nature is pretty much the same now. I mean, those big companies, what they build in Halong Bay, they build in Phu Quoc. I hear the same show which you have in Phu Quoc in the south every day, they're going to bring this show to Halong Bay now as well. You know, if you build the same thing and you do the same, then you're actually not diversifying the country's potential itself. I mean, people often don't say anymore, I go to Thailand. They say, I go to Phuket, I go to Bangkok, I go to Chiang Mai. Oh, Chiang Mai stands for something totally different than Phuket.
Of course.
You know, we don't do that enough yet, you know. It starts slowly, Dalat starts making efforts, but people go to Vietnam. You know, so it is not in the people's mind that Vietnam actually has a huge diversity, but we're also not really pushing that diversity. We are just right now copy-pasting everywhere the same, you know. So I think that is one thing. What Vietnam really needs to do is, I think they should have regional offices, and they should really give those people in these regional offices the necessary tools and education. You have a lot of hardworking people, but it's more like a learning by doing. Again, Da Nang has an outstanding tourism office, but I see many areas in Vietnam, they don't have this kind of professionalism, you know, and that would help a lot. So, and of course, sustainability is also an opportunity for Vietnam. I don't know if you had the time at HorFX to go to one of the panels which we had. There are amazing people in this field in Vietnam. And this would be a great opportunity as well.
Well, I know that sustainability is a number one priority for the government right now, but exactly what does that mean? Developing a culture of understanding sustainability. And even though sometimes it's cost prohibitive, I've had many conversations with restaurateurs who try to recycle and try to go green, and they're like, oh, it's too expensive, we need to use styrofoam. What steps are you guys specifically now instigating to be sustainable, and what are your future plans for this?
I think you have to start with being very honest. I mean, you have to actually start asking the question, can tourism really be sustainable? You know, I mean, how much is it worth if some hotels are washing the bed linen only every third day, they're not changing the towels anymore, but at the same time they try to fly in all the tourists from the United States.
Exactly.
You know, so you've got to be realistic on that and say, starting to talk about we want to be neutral, you're not going to be neutral. You're never going to be neutral as a hotel, because as long as the airplanes go with kerosene, you're never going to be neutral. Whatever you do as a hotel can lower the burden for nature, but you're not going to make it carbon zero, as they say.
Of course.
You know, but some of the international companies, they promote now, we're going to be carbon zero by the year 2030 or 2040. And I'm like, yeah, you may be going to be carbon zero as a hotel, but you're still promoting heavily the people flying in. Now, that is nothing against tourism. We need the tourism, and tourism is good for the economy. But that means you got to be real. And when you are real, you say, okay, we're bringing these people over here. Now, what can we actually do to maximize sustainability when these people are here?
Right.
And that is exactly what we mentioned before. This is not only environmental, to take care of the environment, but this is actually also to look after the local community, right? To work with them together, for example. So what is Furama, for example, doing? Well, we are particularly proud of our Tai Chiang farm. This is a farm at the border to Laos. We signed actually a contract with the People's Committee with a community at the border to Laos. That community consists mainly of Ko-Tu people, an ethnic minority, and after signing this contract, the military has handed over a piece of land of nearly 30 hectares, and these people are now growing their vegetables, fish and meat, and we guarantee we buy everything from these Ko-Tu people and bring it to Furama. So this is what you can do, you know. It's like I always say, we feed one village feeds us. So we give them an income. Right, and that's what you can do, for example, you know. I do remember in a panel at the HorFX, to come back, one person actually said that very interestingly. We need to start educating the tourists, and the tourists need to start changing behavior. How ecological is it if I open up a luxury hotel in the mountains of Vietnam and my tourists want to have beef from Australia, wine from France, fresh apples from New Zealand, mozzarella from Italy? Isn't there the beginning where we as hoteliers should start educating our guests and say, look, I'm a 5-star hotel, I'm a 5-star luxury hotel, but I work with local products. Now, my mozzarella might not be the mozzarella from Italy, but my mozzarella is very good, but it's a local product, which, by the way, 4P Pizzas, they make an excellent mozzarella locally, you know. So I think this is where we should make the difference. And that's the key. We are not going to be carbon zero as hotels as long as people come with the airplanes. So we can reduce that only by educating the tourists as well. I give you good wine, but maybe wine in the area here, you know. I know that sounds very, very like a dream, you know, but ultimately...
Or not focus on wine, but focus on craft cocktails, focus on other kind of beverage offerings that are not...
Do you really need to have 50 kinds of gin from all over the world? And I'm not talking about the specialty bar. You know, you have one or the other bar, they're going to have their 50 gins, I get that. But does each and every hotel really need to have 50 gins from all over the world?
Right.
You know, I mean, these are just thoughts. Do I have the solution right now? No. But we are heading into something. So what is going to happen in 10 or in 20 or in 30 years? China keeps growing. India is growing. We are getting hundreds of millions of people growing into the middle class, and they can afford to fly. What is going to happen then? You know, how do we as hotels try to balance this? You know, yeah, maybe we have more tourists coming because we all want to grow, but maybe we reduce other flights or we look into other transport systems, right? I mean, we are all looking forward. There are the first tests with container ships which do not use kerosene anymore. That will make the big difference. You know, I mean, that brings me to a very, very interesting thought, you know, a very different one. People keep on criticizing Fukuoka for being so artificially with the theme parks, which me, being a typical European, I used to be very critical about this as well. And then I read in a Swiss newspaper somebody giving some thought into it. We all know we have already problems in Barcelona, in Venice with over-tourism, right? What happens if the demand is higher than what is available? Prices go up, availability is restricted, right? So when I was a kid, we used to jump into the train, TGV, and we used to go to Paris spontaneously. What happens if another 100 million Chinese and another 100 million Indians want to see Paris? They have the right. We cannot say you don't have the right. We did it. They can do it as well. Can Paris absorb it? No way. What's going to happen? Sooner or later, Paris becomes incredibly expensive because demand versus what is Paris able to do, or Paris even starts charging entrance fee. And we can see that development already. Venice already starts to put a maximum of visitors per day. Hoi An is considering an entrance fee when you go into Hoi An. So traveling becomes more expensive. Traveling becomes more exclusive because destinations cannot absorb. So, but let's say the Indians, okay? But that can be any nationalities. The Indians still want to see the Eiffel Tower. So what's the solution? A theme park. So actually, an artificial Venice in Fukuoka is actually satisfying the cravings of Chinese tourism to go to Venice maybe, but they cannot afford to go to Venice anymore because Venice is shutting down and say 20,000 tourists a day. An artificial Eiffel Tower in China actually can help the environment. You know, and I find that a very, very interesting thought, a thought which I didn't have myself. Turn it round.
Well, they've done it in Da Nang with Banai Hills. I mean, it's Oktoberfest every day. It's like a Vietnamese version of Disneyland just up the mountain from you.
Absolutely. It's maybe better to have 5 million flying to Da Nang and going to Bonner Hills than 5 million flying to Munich.
Right.
Because Munich can't take it anymore anyway. It's anyway full, right? And it's also better for nature. So this negativity towards those theme parks, which I used to have for a long time as well, actually you can turn it around and say, wait. A theme park nearby, which gives you the opportunity to visit all this copy, is actually giving people the opportunity to see something for a lower price, which otherwise they might not see anymore anyway. And number two, it might actually even help nature.
Interesting. Well, we're running short of time. I have one final question for you.
Seriously? Wow.
Yeah.
I thought we were having like a 3 hours talk together.
I know, it's been an hour. Very, very interesting. So, what advice would you give to a young kid starting out in hospitality? You are a legend in your field, and you are in mentorship. So, what would be the one key bit of advice that you would tell a young hotelier, a young person, a young chef, anyone growing up in this industry, from your experience, and how would you mentor them?
Find your purpose.
Find your purpose.
Find your purpose. When you know why, what for you're doing it, it doesn't matter if it's children, wife, family, for the society, for the environment, for yourself, for making money, it doesn't matter. Find your purpose. When you have a purpose, then you have an energy. And with this, everything comes.
Thank you so much, Andre. It has been a pleasure being with you. Thanks to you, audience. This is Chat.Travel Podcast. I'm Tracy May. It has been my pleasure to be with you. Have a great day. See you next time.